was a lot of fun. Tapping into my creative side. Yeah, I saw it, just hearts, which I think is kind of,
That's really cool.
I like the hearts because it kind of plays more into, you know, the meaning of it.
I was out testing some of them a minute ago, and they look really good. And they win the ground pretty easily too. So.
That's good.
Hey, we'll order a bunch of them. Lots of puppies.
It'll be great though. I really like those little, the rubber ones like that.
Nothing but well.
Yeah. Kind of shocked no one's in here yet.
Oh, really? For the program?
Yeah. I think our schedule's been with, because I originally planned it when I wasn't sure what we were going to do with Memorial Day and June 6th, so it threw off everything with that. So we took last week off completely from all programs, and this week's just a kids-focused program. So.
Well, and you wonder if like school being kind of done. And yeah, I hope lots of people.
So hello, everybody, and welcome to the National G-Day Memorial. If you can, go ahead and let us know where you're watching from within the chat feature. We're going to get started in about 3 minutes. So hold tight for just a little bit, and we'll get started by taking a look at propaganda posters. For those of you guys just tuning in, we'll get started in about 2 minutes. So hold tight for the time being. We'll dive into propaganda posters shortly. If you can, go into the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen. It has 3 little dots, looks like a little chat bubble. And just let us know where you're watching from and who all is watching with you. And again, we'll get started very, very soon. So we now have less than a minute until we begin. Again, just let us know where you're watching from within the chat feature. If you have any questions that come up throughout the program in regards to content, if you can just put those within the Q&A feature, looks like 2 little chat bubbles together. If you put your questions there, it'll be easier to respond to. You're more than welcome to put it within the chat feature, just it may get lost there. But the chat feature is great, especially let us know if we have any technical difficulties, if you can't hear, things like that. So we will get started in just a few seconds. Again, if you haven't put where you're watching from and who else is watching with you within the chat feature, we love to see where everyone is watching from as we connect virtually. Okay, so it looks like it's 1 o'clock. I'm going to turn it over to our president and CEO, April Chick-Messier, in just 1 second. So bear with me through this transition.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are talking about something that I think you'll find very enjoyable, propaganda posters in World War II. I love talking about these because they're colorful, they're fun, and they had some very positive messages really that came out of the war. So I think it's a nice topic to look at today. And we'll look at lots of different examples and talk about some of the different themes that you would have seen in propaganda posters during that time. So thank you for joining us. What was propaganda? Propaganda obviously was a way to shape and influence behavior and opinions, usually towards some governmental aim. What's interesting about propaganda, of course, is that all countries used it. It wasn't just the Hitlers or the Stalins of the world. You had a lot of democratic nations that used lots of propaganda as well. The United States and Britain, France, many different countries used it for various purposes. Usually it was to secure the backing of the public for a significant purpose. I love this quote from Archibald MacLeish, which talks about the principal battleground of this war is not the South Pacific. It is not the Middle East. It is not England or Norway nor the steppes of Russia. It is American opinion. And he was the director of the Office of Facts and Figures during World War II. And that was so true, that truly they knew that you had to get the backing of the American people if the war was going to be successful. Not only for all of the challenges that were going to be faced, but the sacrifices that Americans on the home front would have to make. Everything that was going to be shortages on the home front, from rationing to everything that you were going to have to just change the way you lived, change the way you shop, change the way you worked. For many Americans, going to work and working in the defense industry and things like that, there was going to need to be a lot of messaging out there about why those things were important, why you were going to have to give it your all. And that's where really propaganda came in, and particularly the propaganda poster. There were different mediums for propaganda. As you know, there was radio, so particularly a lot playing out on the radio. And you had your Office of War Information, which oversaw this giant propaganda campaign that really helped develop that messaging, whether it was on radio, whether it was in magazines, movies. You used certainly famous people, actors, and well-known artists and writers to help convey those messages. And you even use things like cartoons. There's a famous one here from Walt Disney. So they used all kinds of mediums, but what they found was really the most popular one was the propaganda poster. And you would see these everywhere. And that was the beauty of the propaganda poster. They were small, they were kind of a novelty. You could post them anywhere. You could put them in schools, you could put them in businesses, you could put them in retail establishments and post offices. And they were usually very catchy. They were something that caught your eye. They usually had some kind of slogan on it that made it something you could easily remember. And they always had some type of theme, which we'll talk about as we go throughout today. Your darn tootin' will keep them shooting. Okay, so you would have seen this at a factory, again, encouraging people why you need to continue to work and work very hard in the defense industry. And you would have seen quite a few messages like this. And usually, as I said, they always had a theme. And they usually were very creative, and they usually had some kind of sense of urgency. I love the creative posters that made you chuckle a little bit. Set them on their axis. Of course, the axis power is there. Let's go, everybody. Keep them firing. So again, this blend of kind of artwork with advertising, with messaging. That's what made propaganda posters, I think, so successful. Keep them firing. So again, something you would see in a factory, something that was encouraging, again, that sense of urgency, that we all need to come together. Every citizen is a soldier. You would really see these propaganda posters mix the battlefront with the home front, and that you as a citizen were part of that battlefront. And that was certainly a message you would see over and over again with this. This visual call to arms really wartime posters, as poster designers said, should be to the eye what the shouted command is to the ear. So you would see something that was usually very clear, very easy to understand. In addition to that, they usually were very personal. You know, they knew that if they appealed to the emotional side, certainly that would be much more powerful. It would be something that you would remember. We're fighting to prevent this. So you see the swastika on the boot there, on the heel of this church. That was something that was very personal and that was going to leave an impression with you. And again, it's raising that possibility, this grim possibility that the war is extending to one's own backyard. So that's something that certainly would have gotten your attention. Other posters like Avenge Pearl Harbor, or Bullets Will Do It. Shortly after Pearl Harbor, you would have seen a poster like this. And again, that sense of urgency, something you would have seen throughout factories, or Bullets Will Do It. So again, that personal thing, it's focused on patriotism, doing one's duty, while other countries tended to focus primarily on hatred of the enemy. You really would have seen in American propaganda a much more positive focus in many ways, and really a attention to what you could do, how you could take part. And you'll see that over and over again. Propaganda posters, many at first in the early days of the war, you would have seen them on these large billboards, like this was in New York on 42nd and 5th Avenue. But really what the appeal of these posters was that you could make them small, anybody could produce them, and they could go anywhere. So you're going to start seeing them in every kind of business possible. And they really stood out. They were colorful, people loved them. This is the one that was on that billboard, Buy a Share in America. This one was quite popular because it's encouraging to buy defense bonds. And defense bonds were needed. They were very much needed because you had to fund the war. You had to be able to pay for all of the equipment that you needed to fund the war. And so defense bonds were going to be a topic of many of your posters. You buy them, we'll fly them. So defense bond stamps here, again, this was such a successful campaign. With the defense bonds, I think during the course of the year, the government raised almost $61 billion through these posters, using them over and over again. Attack, 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 buy war bonds. Again, just another example. You see the soldiers here, they have their equipment, have to fund that equipment somehow. So you're going to see that use of buy war bonds. In addition to that, you're going to see a lot of posters that focus on conservation. In fact, those were probably the most popular posters that you're going to see during that time. 1 in 7 posters focused on conserving in some way. For example, this one here, you see victory gardens. Victory gardens became huge during the war, but they really needed to get the word out that you needed to plant your own garden and how important that was. Over 20 million Americans planted victory gardens in World War II. 40% of the nation's vegetables came from victory gardens. And really so much of that had to do with all of the posters and everything that were aimed at people, knowing that they needed to do their share, that this was extremely important. So this was another topic of all those posters. Have you really tried to save gas by getting into a car club? Again, another focus, making you feel a little guilty. So certainly a lot of posters use that tactic as well. If you wanted to just jump in your car, you thought twice about it. So many restrictions out there. They do it, so can we. Carry more to win the war. Again, very catchy, a lot of slogans that would stick with you. So that was important. Don't take the squander bug when you go shopping. So a lot of creativity as well. This poster was one that really reminded people when they went shopping not to spend too much, to be careful with their rationing points and things like that. So conservation really key. Waste helps the enemy conserve material. Again, the designs here, and all these artists who are designing these posters, by the way, were not paid by the government. They did them on their own. They submitted their designs, and they were usually chosen by the Office of War Information. Just a couple other examples. Save your cans, help pass the ammunition. So you can see all the different tin cans that you would save. They would eventually become recycled and used in some fashion to help the war effort. So again, encouraging you in every way that you can as a citizen to do your share. And I love, again, the humor. Better potluck with Churchill today than humble pie under Hitler tomorrow. Don't waste food. So again, using humor as well was very popular, reminding you that, hey, listen, don't complain. It could be worse. Do your share. Production was a huge theme during the war as well. And you're going to see this in all of the factories. The defense industry was so vitally important. So remember that in the 1930s, there had been a lot of labor disputes. And because of that, the government really had to focus on how to bring people together. How do you bring management together, all these different labor unions for a common cause, which was, hey, we've got to produce for the war effort. This was extraordinarily important. And so you're really going to see also in the defense industry that complete change from consumer goods, because remember, your defense industries have gone to producing war equipment, not things that you would need at home like pots and pans and vacuum cleaners and washing machines, but they're making jeeps and tanks and grenades. And so the government launched a campaign urging workers to make personal sacrifices to help win the war. And you're going to see these posters over and over again, kind of applying a little guilt here, is that you need to set aside your differences. You need to work together. It's all about more production. Over and over again, you're going to see that theme, more production. Work to keep free. Here in the background, you can see it looks like the image of the Statue of Liberty, the flame of liberty there, and the work mallet. You know, if you do your share, it will help keep us all free. So you're going to see quite a few posters with that theme. And factories, who quite frankly are creating their own posters. Boy, I sure did a good day's work today. So you can see encouraging you to do your best, to think about why you're doing the work that you're doing in the defense industry and how important it is. Men working together. You're going to see that over and over and over again. Again, calling for factory managers and employees to come together, to set aside their differences and really think about what they're doing in the name of patriotism. You know, there had been so many difficult situations in the years leading up to the war between labor unions and things like that. This was so key for the government to make sure these posters were out there and have them work together, because production truly was going to be what would help us win the war. Just to give you an example of that, in 1940, Adolf Hitler said an American intervention by mass deliveries of planes and war materials would not change the outcome of the war. Well, we know that was very, very wrong. At the Tehran conference in 1943, Joseph Stalin raised his glass for a toast with President Roosevelt, and he said, to American production, without which the war would be lost. So we know how important production was, and we know that things are being produced at an amazing rate during World War II. And you're going to see poster after poster really stress that need. Together, we win. And you can see the management here. You can see your management, your labor officials with your employees here, and Uncle Sam kind of bringing people together. Again, crack the axis with uninterrupted production. And only then can we win the war. And really focusing on other things as well, not just the relations between management and employees, but also just really focusing on the fact that you as a citizen soldier in a way in the factories, need to get it right. Do it well, do it right, make it right. You're going to see a lot of posters that focus on those. Get hot, keep moving, don't waste a precious moment. You know, really that if you waste time, that's almost like treason. You know, you need to be doing the very best you can. You need to not be thinking about yourself or when you're going to have a vacation or how many hours you're working, but really it's all about setting that aside and making those personal sacrifices. And you see that in these posters. More production again and again and again. That theme comes through. This is one of the more popular posters from 1941. Americans answer production. So you see that theme. It's coming through quite regularly here. Good news from home, tanks, planes, guns, and ships. More production. And again, very positive messages, and also meant to really boost morale, to keep reminding you what you're doing this for. Safety was very important, and of course this would be something that the factories looked at over and over again. So we need to make sure, again, that you're watching out for yourself and others. So safety would be paramount, because if you're hurt or somebody else is hurt, well, idle hands work for Hitler. So again, reminding people to be careful, do your share, take care. United we win, just another example of that coming together. Because of Executive Order 8802, you had African-American men working together. And again, it was all about putting aside any differences or any racial tensions, coming together and doing the job. So you would see that. This was a rather rare poster because you didn't see a lot of African-Americans in propaganda posters at the time, mainly because they were afraid that that would create some more tensions within the workplace. And it was also very sexy. You saw almost no African-American women in propaganda posters either, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But the message was still there when you saw it, that together we need to set aside our differences. We need to work together for the good of the country. And do your job right. That also was really paramount. God help me if this is a dud. His life is in your hands. So, that would make you think twice. When you're on the job, you might be tired. You might be, wanting to rush the job, but you better make sure you get it right. This would make you think, if I mess up, it could cost him his life. So again, propaganda really geared toward making you take that inner responsibility that you had to do your very best. Stamp them out, you and I. Beat your promise. The promise refers to like production quotas. Perhaps at a particular plant, the production quota is 1,500 grenades in a day. The idea is to, hey, let's stamp that out. Let's make 1,800 in a day. So again, boosting morale, getting people to think about what you're doing this for and why it is so critically important. Even things like, in terms of efficient employees, your work schedule. Don't show up late. No matter what the excuse, try to be on time. Better late than never, but guess what? Never late is better. Let's start on time to finish the axis. So again, you would see a lot of posters like that out there. How about this one? This one's pretty graphic. Death never takes a holiday. Why should you? Well, that would make you feel pretty guilty if you decided you were, upset that you hadn't had a week off or a couple days off in a while, and you see this poster, it make you think twice about those 16 million who are serving in the military. They're not getting a vacation. So you need to continue to do your job. So again, a lot of these images looking to you and saying, what all are you doing? Are you doing all you can? And that was really based off a famous Uncle Sam Wants You poster from World War I, and really pointing the finger at you. Makes you stop and think, what are you doing for the war effort? And these posters are really designed, again, to create an atmosphere of unity and urgency and productivity. Now, let's talk about the artwork for just a moment, because you see different styles of propaganda posters. Some worked, some didn't. Some were more successful than others. And so with the Office of War Administration, there were actually two competing factions within that group. And they had various ideas over what posters really worked and what didn't. For one group, they really liked the idea of stylized imagery of war art. And then you had another group of designers who came in who were mainly from the advertising world, and they liked it to look more like advertisements. So there was a lot of debate over what should war propaganda posters look like. And they went through a lot of different trials and error. The advertising side, they usually came out looking more like advertisements, the smiling faces, something that you would see in an ad. And then you had your war art proponents who really felt like they liked stylized imagery. This is a great example of that. So this little debate was raging. And so the admin, the advertising proponents basically said, well, let's just do a survey. Let's send this poster out to different factories in New Jersey, and we're going to see what they think about this poster. And they did. And overwhelmingly, of course, what you see here, he's watching it, which is supposed to be the enemy, right? It's supposed to be Germany, the German soldier. You can see his helmet here. When this went out to survey to the different factories, the survey came back, everybody thought he was the boss, not a German soldier. So obviously this didn't work so well. The stylized imagery was lost on a lot of factory employees. They really weren't even sure what this was. Some even commented they thought that was the Liberty Bell. The stylized imagery was a dismal failure. So that particular poster did not work, and either did this one. Again, same survey went out, kind of a stylized imagery here. You see the worker with his rivet gun. The rivet gun here is supposed to be the rivets that go into the planes and different materials. But when the survey came back, most factory workers thought this was about the FBI's fight on crime. They thought these were gangsters with machine guns, and it was lost on them. So this kind of stylized imagery with propaganda posters really did not work. And so your advertising proponents within the propaganda world really won out. So you would see something a little bit more direct, something more like an advertisement that really comes out of that. So you see things like this here, which again was very straightforward. It's basically pointing out everything you need to do, for example, to be a bee home. How do you become a bee home? you find time for war work, you raise and share food, you conserve everything you have, you buy war bonds. So it's pretty straightforward. Help bring them back to you. And again, that sense of urgency that you really want to bring everyone home. So imagery was very important with these propaganda posters. As you can see in this one right here, which was the famous Norman Rockwell poster here, ours to fight freedom from fear. And it really shows a very idealized America, and particularly in a potential post-war world, that getting back to normal, what that's going to look like. But before we could get to that world, and this was a very comforting image, we had to deal with the world that we're in at the moment, which looked more like this. And again, here you see that real sense of fear, urgency, the warning right across the top there, the German Luger and the bloody knife there. Our homes are in danger now. This is something, again, you would have seen in a lot of factories, defense plants. Our job, keep them firing. So certainly this would be something that made it, again, very personal, that you would have certainly taken a look at. And they had done a lot of surveys and a lot of questionnaires about, what is going to appeal to the American public the most. And it all had to do with emotions, really tugging on that fear of what could happen and using those images of kind of Americans in danger, but how do we fight back? And so you're going to see these kinds of imagery. This one right here is actually a Canadian propaganda poster, but you can see that even though that last image was very threatening, what could be more powerful than that? Showing a woman and her child. That's even more powerful. And women really represented the home. They represented the home front. A serene life. And this is pretty threatening here, coming under the grips of tyranny. You can see the clawed hands here. Obviously, she's in danger, her and her child. It's kind of the personification of vulnerability. Wartime propaganda did a lot to underline this idea that fascism directly threatened women and the home front. And so usually you see that played out with a picture or a poster of a family. There was a study done of commercial posters taken by the US government who found that images of women and children in danger were extraordinarily effective emotional devices, as you can imagine. So this one was very popular. American propaganda posters did something similar, as you can see here. Don't let anything happen to them. Keep them firing. So again, probably not as powerful as the last poster that we just saw, but certainly makes you think. And, here's the woman and her children, they're reading, but you don't want anything to happen to them. It's that sense of serenity that could suddenly go away. This was actually a very stylized kind of image, an artist rendering, and it was created in 1942 by the Oldsmobile division of General Motors. And again, encouraging Americans to not let this happen. I think this is a powerful image as well. You can see, again, the focus just on children here and that shadow of the swastika that seems to be closing in on them. The big brother who's kind of protecting his siblings. The American flag waving high, reminding us all that we have to protect the next generation, that it's up to us. Don't let that shadow touch them. Buy war bonds. That's definitely an emotional device that's going to motivate you, and it certainly did for many people. And then we have ones like this, which are a bit more realistic, very touching, very grim. This one was produced in 1943, playing again upon our instincts to protect our children and reminding us that we don't want this to happen here at home. How do we stop it? We buy war bonds. So you can see why the war bond campaign was very, very popular, because this theme running through this of how do we do our share? What can we do? You buy war bonds to keep this from happening. Here's another one. Dear God, keep them safe. That's a very surreal, most frightening image to think your children could be going to school wearing gas masks, which obviously had happened in Britain. So again, it was that theme of don't let this happen here. This was actually put out by Kroger, I believe. Buy war bonds and stamps. And again, just playing on your emotional fears that you need to do your share. Now, ones that are a little bit more humorous, they found did not work quite as well. So you've got a date with a blonde, and that's crossed out and it says with a bond. by victory bonds. And so what they found that, in fact, in 1942, they came out with another study that said that humorous posters obviously attracted less attention. They made a less favorable impression than ones that were a little bit more serious or more realistic. And so this one probably didn't do as well as some of the other ones that we've seen. This one, however, certainly did. Before It's Too Late by War Bonds. I mean, look at the fear in that mother's eyes and the child. Obviously, this is probably going to move you much more than that last poster we saw. That I took a little humorous stab at it. This one is going to elicit some fear in you, and I think you're more apt to do something to help to keep that from happening than you would if you'd seen the other one. And so you're going to start to see a lot more realistic posters emerge, particularly in the latter part of the war. And that's going to be very important to help ramp up those sales of war bonds and things like that. So you'll see quite a few like this and like this. This is from the Produce for Victory series that came out. Again, very real image here. And it's just reminding you that we've got to keep this from happening here. And you can see the language there. This is everybody's war. The enemy has made it so. May you never know what it means to be a refugee, to be hungry, to be homeless. Make sure this never happens to you. So again, appealing to our emotions and to our fears so that we will get involved in the war effort, so that we will do our part. This one's a bit more of a, well, it's kind of an animated looking feel here. But if you look at that poster carefully, what's the one thing that stands out? The one thing that I noticed out of all that rubble is that there's a baby crib right here. You can't see anything else, but you see a baby's crib. It can happen here unless we keep them firing. So again, that whole series of we got to keep producing for victory. We've got to do our share. We've got to keep this right here from happening here at home. Or how about this image of the young boy here? Is he your child? You don't want this. Buy war bonds before it's too late. So again, these are all things that would stir that emotion in you to do your part. So certainly buying war bonds was a very prominent theme and looking at what could happen. So was making sure that you were that you were more careful in things that you said when you're out and about. Careless talk could be extraordinarily dangerous. It could be something as easily as sharing information that you may have overheard about a troop transport, something, a ship that's leaving a port or anything like that. Any kind of information that technically should not be shared with anyone could cost lives. And so you're going to see a lot of propaganda posters out there about being very careful about what you say. Careless talk got there first. You can see the soldier has been probably gravely wounded. And it's just a reminder that you could be responsible for his death if you are not careful. Careless talk. Now, you're going to see a whole series of these posters, particularly toward the end of the war. They're going to get more graphic. Like this one was in 1942. This is probably one of the most popular propaganda posters of the war. It was produced in 1942. You can see the gold star in the background. We know that the gold star means that that soldier is not coming home. And you have this sad puppy dog who's waiting for his master to come home, and that master is never going to come home again because somebody talked. That was a very powerful image. And so that was something that would probably stay with you, to be very extra cautious about anything that could be said or any valuable information that you knew. Or they use catchy slogans like loose lips might sink ships. Well, that was something that you could easily remember. So using those kind of catchy slogans certainly worked as well. That's something that people would walk around saying, loose lips sink ships. So that was a very catchy one. Or if you talk too much, this man may die. That's pretty powerful. You look into the eyes of that sailor right there, you know, wow, have to be careful with information that we share. Or how about award for careless talk? I don't think you want that award right there. You know, don't discuss troop movements, ship sailings, or war equipment. Things like that could be really imperative. And this one stirred a lot of controversy. And actually, there were quite a few careless talk posters, if you look at them, who focused on women. And for a lot of women during World War II, they found that extremely offensive. And particularly this one. This one says, wanted for murder. Her careless talk costs lives. Okay, for some reason, a lot of the careless talk posters did feature women. And so we realized there were a lot of women at home on the home front, but a lot of women were very upset about this. In fact, there was a lady in Hawaii who wrote to the Office of War Information, and she summed it up for the way a lot of women felt about this. She said, American women who are knitting, rolling bandages, working long hours at war jobs, and then carrying on with women's work at home, in short, taking on the countless drab duties to which no salary and no glory are attached, resent these unwarranted and presumptuous accusations which have no basis in fact. So as you can imagine, something like this was pretty offensive for the vast majority of women who took it very seriously, and they did not share this kind of information. And they knew that, you know, men could be just as guilty as talking as women were. But for the most part, you're going to see a lot of women used in these images here. A lure or a lure, you know, is she trying to get information out of you? So again, military affairs saying, be careful out there about talking to certain people. This is actually a British poster here. Keep mom, she's not so dumb. You know, careless talk costs lives. Really implying, could she be a spy? Is she trying to get information out of you? So these posters were kind of amusing. This one's actually from Finland, same idea, showing a woman. Looks like, you know, some kind of lock on her mouth there to keep her from talking. So it wasn't just here in America. You saw these everywhere. Keep it under your hat. Obviously, that's a lady's hat there. So you see quite a few of these. Or he's sailing tomorrow for, and then she talked and this happened. So again, you're going to see quite a few of those types of posters, which, you know, again, offended a fair amount of women. This one was very popular too. Don't forget that walls have ears. You can see all the little Hitler faces there. So careless talk costs lives. And certainly putting the ones with young children in there were very, very effective. You know, protect his future, watch your tongue, and silence means security. So that really got you thinking. You know, be very careful with any information that you might share. Or don't kill her daddy with careless talk. That was a very powerful poster and certainly captured people's attention there. Be very careful. It made you stop and think. At the end of the day, that's what those posters did. Another theme certainly had to do with recruitment, and that was recruitment with women in the war industry. With 16 million serving in World War II, most of the men were away, and the defense industry had to produce an incredible amount of supplies for the war effort. There was a huge shortage in labor, and so they had to really go out there and try to recruit women. The problem was that a lot of women, there were quite a few women who had never worked before, who were married, and so these wartime propaganda posters really were to convince women that it was okay to work. You know, there was this fear that working you would sacrifice your femininity. And so these posters, as you'll see, always seem to feature this immaculate looking, beautiful woman who's been working all day but still looks perfect. So, but the idea was to show that you could still go to work and be very feminine. And this was not just for recruiting women, this was also for a lot of your management, mostly in male positions, to convince them that it's okay to hire women. There was such a shortage that they had to make sure they were recruiting as many women as possible into the defense industry. And here you see, I've found the job where I fit best. Find your war job. And notice they always say war job, not just a job, it's a war job. And the main reason for that, again, going back to this is propaganda, is that they wanted to make sure that you knew as a woman that this was a temporary job. When men came back, that job would go away. So the wording was always pretty, you know, was on purpose there. We can do it. Obviously, one of the most famous images here, our Rosie the Riveter. And, you know, there were so many different posters that I could show you here, but, you know, women workers were soldiers without guns, dames of defense, Winnie the Welder, Rosie the Riveter. Women were doing so many different jobs, not just in the defense industry, but everywhere. You had women working for the USO to help entertain the troops. You had more than 3 million women join the Red Cross to run canteens and serve as nurses' aides or drive ambulances. In the Pacific Northwest, you had 4,000 women who logged hillsides. They were called lumberjills instead of lumberjacks. In Tennessee, 2,000 teenage girls harvested 1 million gallons of strawberries. So women were out there, and they were they were doing their share. And all of these images really showed that we can do it. And it just was just a great way to encourage women to get out there and help in any way that you could. Produce for victory, man for man, America's workers and America's soldiers are the best in the world. We help them build our nation, we'll help them defend it. Again, the very feminine image here of women in the workplace. Her nails look absolutely perfect. It probably would not look that way if you were working at these machines all day long, but it's again highlighting the fact that you can do these jobs and it won't sacrifice that feminine image at all. Do the job he left behind, again emphasizing that he left behind and that he will come back to. But again, you know, you see these are all white women. We don't see African American women or Latino women or you know, any kind of diversity here. Which is a shame because there was such a labor shortage in World War II. And you had African American women, for example, who could easily have done this work, but they were not sought after. They were not recruited. And these posters really just left them out completely of the picture. And for Black women, they were usually the last hired and the first fired. And it really left a vacuum, I think, in the workforce. Women in the war, we can't win without them. Again, a really directive to factory owners and businesses that we need women in the workforce, so don't overlook them. The more women at work, the sooner we win. And recruitment posters even really trying to recruit them, not just for defense industry jobs, because remember, a lot of women went into defense jobs because it paid so much better. That actually left a vacuum in other positions. Teachers, a lot of restaurants had to close up because they couldn't even find waitresses. You know, you had a lot of a vacuum in a lot of these other positions that the government is trying to encourage women to fill those as well. Longing won't bring him back sooner, get a war job. Again, this poster very stereotypical of the time. You can see that contrary to popular belief among those who were producing these posters, most women needed a job. It wasn't just going out and recruiting married women to help in the war effort out of patriotic duty. Most women who worked were already working before the war started, and they needed work during the war. And so this really kind of ignored that part of society at the time, is that even when the war was over, these women were going to continue to need to work to help support their families. So there was this kind of middle class perception in a lot of the propaganda posters that overlooked an entire really different segment of the population. Again, get a war job. You know, this idea that she can get a war job now, and as soon as her husband's back, she can go back to being the homemaker and raising the family. But that really wasn't reality for most women who needed those jobs. I'm making bombs and buying bonds. So again, buy victory bonds. And a lot of women did obviously go into the defense industry and other jobs for patriotic reasons. But again, the vast majority were looking, they needed to work anyway. And let's see, a couple more here. Again, victory waits on your fingers, keep them flying, looking for stenographers and other positions. So you'll see propaganda really looking not just at those in the defense industry. This is a great example of a poster from Britain. Women of Britain come into the factories. Oops, let's go back. Or how about just the fact that if you are at home and you're not working in the defense industry necessarily, but you're still in the Army now, you're still a soldier helping on the home front, doing all you can. Your aid is vital. And that's, again, going back to that conservation theme of saving everything, conserving everything, not throwing anything away. You know, it was very tiring to do everything that needed to be done during the war because nothing was thrown away. You had to make sure that you were doing all these different things to do your part in the war. And it's just like this, part-time war worker, you know, whether you're working in a factory or you're coming home and you're tending to the victory garden and conserving and rationing and all those things, that means you're doing your part. And again, just another example of that whole conservation, grow your own, can your own. You see a lot of these themes throughout, mending, making do with what you have. Love these examples here. And this, I think, really It's a very somber poster as well. Won't you give my boy a chance to get home? Don't travel unless your trip helps win the war. You know, you can just see that look in her eyes of wanting her son to be home safe. Really makes you stop and think, are you doing enough? And there are some posters who actually just outright ask that. I gave a man, will you give at least 10% to the war bonds? You know, that's pretty powerful. When you see that and you think, wow, if you're complaining about having to give up maybe 5% of your salary or 10%, you know, she gave her husband for the war effort. So that would have been a very powerful poster reminding us all of the sacrifices. Or how about this? What you're making may save my daddy's life. Yeah, that would probably make you feel pretty good. You know, again, that boost in morale, that idea that we're all coming together to help defeat tyranny in the world. And then the last thing I'll just touch on very quickly is recruitment images, because there was also the need to make sure that women in particular were entering the armed forces, because this was something very new and different. And there was a huge shortage of nurses. And so you can see a lot of these propaganda posters really addressing that. You see the young ladies in the background really admiring this nurse here, and maybe themselves thinking about this as a career choice, as a way to help out in the military and in the war. This is my war too. So that would have been a very powerful image about how you can even go an extra measure, not just on the home front, but really get involved in the armed services. Here with the Women's Reserve U.S. Coast Guard, the SPARS, you see this kind of imagery in the background of kind of the pilgrims, the pioneers, women who have always been strong and independent and willing to go that extra measure to serve their country and to do what's best for the country. So some powerful imagery there. Or for your country's sake today, for your own sake tomorrow, you know, will you serve? Is kind of the idea. And then a couple of other quick ones. Cadet nurse, the girl with the future. Again, just powerful images. You know, this would have been something that women certainly would have potentially looked at as a choice. Save his life and find your own. Yeah, these were compelling images. And I know of a D-Day World War II nurse. She served on D-Day as a flight nurse, who actually joined because of this poster right here. Nurses are needed now. She kind of felt that sense of urgency when she saw this, and she signed up. And so these were important images, and they moved a lot of young women to do their part. And I love that this one says, enlist in a proud profession, because you hadn't ever really seen it described as a profession before. To actually join the U.S. Cadet Nurse Corps, to be a nurse, you've not really seen that. So this was certainly a very powerful phrase that a lot of young women gravitated to when they saw that in particular. And we're going to kind of wrap it up with just a few things. So we could talk all day about all the different types of propaganda posters, but you know, humor certainly played a part. And you know, hi ho, it's off to work we go. Help win the war. Squeeze in one more. Again, these are images that certainly were fun. They were colorful. Like most propaganda posters, they made a statement. They had a message, and powerful messages there that I think really moved everyone to work together and to do their share. And I think these were very, very powerful. Or there's one like this: let's catch him with his panzers down. We will if we keep him firing. So again, humor certainly played a part. They weren't the ones that motivated people the most, but you can have a good chuckle at some of these. But really, you know, keep in mind that there were over 200,000 poster designs in World War II. Millions of posters were out there. And this is really what it all came back to, is why are we doing this? Why is this important? Do with less so they'll have enough. You know, every image that you saw was really about, again, that unity, that cohesiveness, that coming together, and doing what you can do, what your share toward the war effort can be. That was the powerful messages of propaganda posters. And so I think American propaganda posters were very unique in that, because unlike a lot of other propaganda in other countries, they tended to be pretty harsh. They tended to focus on hatred of the enemy. In American propaganda, you rarely saw that. You usually saw these more positive images like this, that just reminded you what you could do to help win the war. And we all had to do our share. So that's really propaganda in a very quick nutshell. And I want to leave just a little bit of time in case there are some questions. And hope that that gave you a good sense of some of the different themes that were out there with propaganda. And there are many others out there, but certainly I think this summed up a few of the more prominent messages that you would have seen with propaganda posters in World War II. So we'll see if there are any questions. I don't think we have any yet. So let me just mention a couple of books. There's not a whole lot out there. Certainly there's some good websites and things like that out there on propaganda. There is a good book called Posters of World War II, Allied and Axis Propaganda, 1939 to 1945. And this one's by Peter Darman. If you really love propaganda posters, this one's great because it gives you kind of the beautiful photographs of different propaganda. But what's wonderful about this one is that you can look at different countries and what their propaganda posters, the different models that they use really with their propaganda. So that's a really great book I would certainly recommend. Let's see if we have any questions yet. We may have one.
We do have one. So what are some examples of propaganda posters aimed at children?
Aimed at for children. Wow. You know, that's interesting because there really weren't a lot. Most of the propaganda certainly were geared more toward adults. I don't know of any specific examples, and I'm sure there are some. That wasn't very, that would have been fairly rare. Most propaganda was really geared at adults and making sure that everyone was doing their part in the war effort. And because they were posted in like businesses and factories primarily and post offices, you probably wouldn't have seen as many really geared toward children specifically. Although the great thing is that schools and other organizations could create their own posters. In fact, the Works Progress Administration, the WWII, wrote an entire booklet on how to create your own propaganda posters. So I think what you would have seen is a lot of institutions, whether maybe churches or schools, creating their own posters for their institutions, for their schools. So I think you would have seen more private examples of that. From a government standpoint, you didn't see a lot geared toward children specifically. I don't think we have any other questions. So I hope you enjoyed today's talk about propaganda. Again, there's a lot of information out there on websites. I encourage you to check out that book. There's another one called The Posters That Won the War by Derek Nelson. And we'll make sure we have that information out there for you. But that's another good read if you want to learn a little bit more and go into a little deeper dive with propaganda posters in World War II. So thank you again. Thank you for joining us, and look forward to having you attend some future lectures. Thank you.